My question about the budget. We do continuing resolutions, and we continue spending, but we never establish an actual budget. What is the problem about establishing an actual budget, even a balanced budget? And if you are in favor of a balanced budget, wouldn't it be a good idea to pass a law that says you can't run for re-election unless we do in fact have a balanced budget?
That'd be a great idea. That'd be a better country if we had such a law in place. The fact is, Carl, we have laws in place that require budgeting and require us to operate, not on the basis of continuing resolutions, but on the basis of real budgeting, where we pass these itemized spending bills, at least a dozen of them at the time. The issue that you've described is an extraordinarily frustrating one. In fact, I can't think of another issue that's been more frustrating in my 4.5 years in the United States Senate. Here's what's been happening. Since 1973, when Congress passed the Budget Act, we've been required to produce a budget every single year. That budget outlines the spending priorities that Congress is going to undertake. Once that budget is passed and put in place, it's been passed by both houses, then the Congress is supposed to start churning out these spending bills, at least a dozen of them. One of them that funds everything in the area of national defense, another one that funds things like the national parks, another one that funds things like the FBI and our criminal justice system and our federal courts, another one that funds our transportation programs and so forth. We get through with those one by one until the entire government and all of its programs are funded. We're able to negotiate and discuss what our spending priorities ought to be. Now, for the last 6 years, Congress has not passed a budget. This year, Congress passed a budget for the first time in 6 years. The last time Congress had passed a budget prior to this year, there was no such thing as the iPad. So during that period of time over the last 6 years, with Harry Reid running the Senate, we did not pass a budget. This was a source of great frustration. Some of us, myself included, introduced budgets, but the Senate refused to pass them. We passed one this year. But then something odd happened, something I didn't expect, and something that's profoundly disappointing to me and so many Americans. Congress has not passed any of these dozen appropriations bills, these spending bills. So the budget we passed doesn't do anything by itself unless we pass these spending bills, or appropriations measures, as they're sometimes described. This has got to change, because when we don't pass these itemized spending or appropriations bills, what happens is that we run up against a cliff, against an artificially imposed deadline, like the one that we're facing at the end of September. And at that point, members of Congress are given a single binary choice. It's a single on or off switch. You've got a choice between funding everything in government or nothing in government. And when the decision is made like that, it creates an inevitable and very dangerous risk of brinksmanship. This is the kind of thing that can cause all kinds of disruptions within government and across our society. It has to stop. This is one of the reasons why I wrote an editorial in the Deseret News about a week ago, decrying the use of continuing resolutions and explaining that they are the biggest problem that we've got, at least financially right now, in the federal government. We've got to turn it around, and that's why I've been calling on Congress to resume the practice of regular order appropriations. When we rely on continuing resolutions, we're rolling the dice. We're creating more and more of a risk every single time we use them of brinksmanship and more and more of a reality in which we'll be stuck with a government that's always stuck on last year's spending levels, with no ability on the part of Congress to fine-tune what the federal government is spending.
Great, thanks, Senator. And that's another his article that the Senator referenced in Deseret News. So you can also find that on his website, lee.senate.gov. It's a great read. It gives you a great perspective in terms of the budgeting process, how the appropriations process works, and what we need to do to get back to what we call regular order and allowing things to stand on their own. And maybe, Senator, you could share real quick. You have a wonderful analogy that I think really simplifies. Sometimes Washington is so complicated. This is a very easy way to think about how Washington is currently spending money as opposed to how it should be spending money.
Yeah, so Carl, imagine if you moved to a very remote location, to a place where you had access to only one store for many, many hours in any direction. And imagine that after moving to that remote location, you were on your way home from work one day and let's suppose your spouse called you and said, hey, don't come home without bread, milk, and eggs, just the basics. Bread, milk, and eggs, go to the store, buy them, then come home. So you go to the store, you get out your shopping cart, you get the bread, put it in the cart, your milk, you put that in the cart, and your eggs, and you get it to the checkout counter. You set out your bread and your milk and your eggs, and you proceed to get out your wallet. You're getting ready to make the purchase. And at that point, the cashier says to you, Carl, you can't buy just bread, milk, and eggs. Not at this store. Because in order to buy those things at this store, you also have to buy a half-ton of iron ore and a large bucket of nails and a book about cowboy poetry and a Barry Manilow album. And in fact, Carl, in order to buy any of those things, you also have to buy one of every single item in this entire store. That'd be ridiculous. You'd end up buying all kinds of things that you didn't need or that you didn't want. You'd end up spending a lot more money than made sense under the circumstances. Well, that's a lot like what it's like working in Congress when Congress is operating on the basis of these back-to-back continuing resolutions. I don't know who decided this was a good idea for Congress to act this way, but when it does, it hurts everyone. It perhaps makes a few people within the Congress of the United States, a few people at the top of the legislative totem pole more powerful, and maybe it makes their day a little bit easier at the moment. But these things happen at everyone else's expense. It makes everything worse for every other American, particularly those who are concerned about good government.